Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi, Shri Kodanitai Maya Purushashi ki jai. So read a little bit from this. So we have a few special days today: Srila Biladeva Vidyabhushana disappearance, Ganga Puja, and Srimati Ganga Mata Goswami appearance. Let's read a little bit about them. Shri Baladeva Vidyabhushana appeared in the 1600s near Remuna, Orissa. In his youth, he mastered Sanskrit grammar, poetry, and logic. After carefully studying the commentaries of Shankara and Madhava, he took initiation in the Tattvavadi disciplic succession of Shripad Madhvacharya. Baladev Vidyabhushana became a Digvijay Pandit, conqueror of all opponents, and began visiting the holy places. Wherever he went, he defeated the local sages, scholars, and sannyasis. In Jagannath Puri, he learned the super excellent philosophy of Sri Krishna Chaitanya from Sri Radha Damodar Goswami and took initiation after converting to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In Vrindavan, he studied Srimad Bhagavatam under Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and worshipped Radha Shyama Sundar. In 1706, Vishwanath Chakravarti sent him to Gulta, near Jaipur, Rajasthan, to uphold the credibility of Mahaprabhu's movement. The local Ramanandis, a branch of Sri Vaishnavas, were claiming that the Bengali Vaishnavas had no right to worship Govindaji because they had no commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Lord Govindaji himself directly revealed the Govinda Bhashya, a Vaishnava commentary on the Vedanta, to Baladev Vidyabhushana. Using it, he solidly established Gaudiya Vaishnavism as an independent philosophy. He also reinstated Bengali Vaishnavas in Govindaji's service in Jaipur. Govinda Bhashya is the only Bhakti commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Shri Baladev Vidyabhushana was a Niskinchana Parama Bhagavat, fully renounced, topmost devotee of Lord Krishna. His more than 24 books and commentaries have helped thousands of Vaishnavas understand the sublime philosophy of Krishna consciousness and the intimate writings of the six Goswamis. Since he was devoid of false prestige, he never wrote about his birth, parents, lineage, and personal life. According to Sri Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Chaitanya Lila, Baladevi Debushan is Gopinath Acharya, the brother-in-law of Sri Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. In Vraja, he serves as Sri Radha's eternal maidservant, Ratnavali Devi. Shri Baladevi Debhushana ki Jai. It is also Ganga Puja, the appearance anniversary of Ganga Devi, the goddess of the river Ganges. Shrimati Ganga Devi ki Jai. And it is also an appearance of Shrimati Gangamata Goswamini. From her childhood, Princess Sachi Devi, the daughter of King Naresh Narayan of Bengal, showed unalloyed devotion to Lord Shri Krishna. She even refused to marry on account of her genuine attachment to Krishna. After her father's demise, she ruled the kingdom, but she soon renounced it to find a bona fide spiritual master. Princess Sachidevi met Sri Haridas Pandit, a leading guru in Vrindavan, and began performing devout bhajan to Govindaji. Although she became frail from under-eating, she would always sleep on the Yamuna's sandy bank and rise before sunrise to clean Govindaji's temple. Daily, she would hear Bhagavad Katha, see Govindaji's arati, circumambulate Radha Shama Sundar's Leela Sthanas, pastime places such as Vamsivat, Sevakunja, Niduvana, and Rasastali. Receiving encouragement from Sri Haridas Pandit, Sachidevi completely dropped her false ego, put on rags, and went house to house in Vraj, begging alms. The Vrajvasis were astonished by her severe renunciation. Taking her guru's suggestion, she went to Radhakund to associate with Lakshmi Priya Devi Dasi, a dear disciple of Sri Haridas. Following Thakur Haridas's perfect example, Lakshmi Priya Devi daily chanted 300,000 names, 192 rounds of Krishna. Every day, the two ladies would circumambulate Govardhan Hill and worship Krishna. On her guru's order, Sachi Devi went to the home of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya in Jagannath Puri. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and most of Lord Gauranga Sundara's eternal associates had already returned to Goloka Vrindavan. Sachi Devi restored Sarvabhauma's house and established first-class worship of Sri Shyama Roy, a deity given to her by a Jaipur Brahmin. Every day she lectured on Srimad Bhagavatam. Her classes became popular, attracting eager listeners from miles around. Many people, including Brahmanas and King Mukunda Dev, took initiation from her. On the day of Ganga Sagar Mela, Sachi Devi, who was residing in Jagannath Puri, desired to bathe in the Ganges. That night, the Ganges flowed from the lotus feet of Lord Jagannath and came to Sachi's ashram. Entering Ganga Devi's waters, Sachi Devi floated to the lotus feet of Jagannath Swami inside the temple. After unlocking the doors the next morning, the pujaris were surprised to find her inside the temple. Thinking she was a thief, they immediately put Sachi Devi in jail. Seeing this mistake, Lord Jagannath appeared simultaneously in a dream to both the Puri king and the head pujari. The Lord ordered them to release Sachi Devi and take initiation from her. From then on, she became famous as Ganga Mata Goswamini. Shrimati Ganga Mata Goswamini ki Jai. read a little bit from Srila Prabhupada's Caritamrita. This is volume 6, chapter entitled Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. Srila Prabhupada's stay at ISKCON Mayapur had been quiet, but as the GBC men began arriving from the west, he heard the latest news of the fierce opposition to Krishna consciousness in America. Tamal Krishna Goswami and Brahmananda Swami, coming from New York, reported that the case in which Adi Keshava Swami was being charged for mind control would be heard later in March, and that the judge had given Adi Keshava permission to come to see Srila Prabhupada. They also told Prabhupada that several other devotees had been kidnapped, and that in some cases parents had secured legal conservatorship through judges to abduct the devotees. What is the complaint of the opposing party? Asked Prabhupada. Again, as when he had argued with Rameshwara Swami, he defended the Krishna consciousness movement, while his disciples fired materialistic arguments at him. It was not just an exercise, he was training his disciples. He had to answer any arguments that had discouraged or weakened them. And beyond that, he was actually the ultimate defender of Krishna consciousness. They say we are zombies, said Brahmananda. Zombies? Prabhupada asked. What is that? Zombies, said Harishori. Like a robot, he have no brain. We are like machines, they say we have no freedom of choice. Children have got also the same thing, replied Prabhupada, but the father stops. Children want to play. They do not like to go to school. Father does not like it. Is that father's attempt to check the child's freedom? Every father is doing that. The government is doing that. Why the government is checking criminals? Prabhupada was interested to hear other news, and Tamal Krishna Goswami reported on the new ISKCON farm in Pennsylvania and on the restaurant in New York City. Brahmananda Swami talked about their new farm in Africa, and both he and Tamal Krishna gave their impression of things at Hare Krishna land in Bombay and reported on Gopal Krishna's progress in printing Prabhupada's books in various Indian languages. His Divine Grace C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Reading from Shri Chaitanya Caritamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 17, text number 185. Dharma Stapana Hetu Sadhura Vyavahara. Dharma Stapan Hetu Sadur Vyavahara. Dharma Stapana Hetu Sadur Vyavahara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Dharma Stapana Hetu Sadhura Vyavahara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Dharma Stapana Hetu Sadhura Vyavahara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Dharma Stapana Hetu Sadhura Vyavahara. Puri Gosanira Ye Acharana Se Dharma Sara. Dharpana stapana hetu sadura vyavahara. Puri gosaniraye acharana siddharma sara. Dharpan stapana hetu sadura vyavahara. Puri gosaniraye acharana siddharma sara. Dharpana stapana hetu sadura vyavahara. Puri gosaniraye charana siddharma sara. Dharma stapana hetu sadura vyavahara. Puri gosaniraye acharana siddharma sara. Dharma stapana hetu sadura vyavahara. Puri gosaniraye acharana siddharma sara. Dharma stapana hetu, to establish the principles of religion. Sadhura vyavahara, behavior of a devotee. Puri gosanira, of Madhavendra Puri. Ye acharana, the behavior. Say that Dharmasara, the essence of all religion. Translation of purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. A devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. The behavior of Madhavendra Puri Goswami is the essence of such religious principles. Responsibly, please. A devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. The behavior of Madhavendra Puri Goswami is the essence of such religious principles. It's a very long purport that was started last week by Prabhupada Prana Prabhu. So we'll continue from, it says, in this material world, karmic fruitive workers are accepted as Mahajans. Is under that Sanskrit, that second Sanskrit verse, sorry, third, after third Sanskrit verse. You found it? Yeah, in this material world. Yeah, it is there. In this material world, karmis, fruitive actors, are accepted as Mahajans by foolish people who do not know the value of devotional service. The mundane intelligence and mental speculative methods of such foolish people are under the control of the three modes of material nature. Consequently, they cannot understand unalloyed devotional service. They are attracted by material activities and they become worshippers of material nature. Thus, they are known as fruitive actors. They even become entangled in material activities disguised as spiritual activities. In the Bhagavad Gita, such people are described as Veda Vadarata, supposed followers of the Vedas. They do not understand the real purpose of the Vedas, yet they think of themselves as Vedic authorities. People versed in Vedic knowledge must know Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vedasya Sarvair Aham Eva Vidya, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 15. In this material world, a person may be famous as Karma Vira, a successful fruitive worker, or he may be very successful in performing religious duties, or he may be known as a hero in mental speculation, Jnana Vira, or he may be a very famous renunciate. In any case, Srimad Bhagavatam 3:23-56 gives the following opinion in this matter. Neha yat karma dharmaya na viragaya kalpate na tirtha pada sevayai jivanapi mritohi sa. Anyone whose work is not meant for elevating him to religious life, anyone whose religious, ritualistic performances do not rise him to renunciation, and anyone situated in renunciation that does not lead him to devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead must be considered dead, although he is breathing. The conclusion is that all pious activity, fruitive activity, religious principles, and renunciation must ultimately lead to devotional service. There are different types of processes for rendering service. One may serve his country, people, and society, the Varnashram Dharma system, the sick, the poor, the rich, women, demigods, and so on. All the service comes under the heading of sense gratification or enjoyment in the material world. It is most unfortunate that people are more or less attracted by such material activity and that the leaders of these activities are accepted as Mahajans, great ideal leaders. Actually, they are only misleaders, but an ordinary man cannot understand how he is being misled. Narottam Das Thakur says, Sadhu Shastra Guru Vakya Chitete Koriya Aikya. One should accept as one's guide the words of the sadhus, the Shastra, and the Guru. A sadhu is a great personality like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The Shastras are the injunctions of revealed scriptures, and the Guru, or spiritual master, is one who confirms the scriptural injunctions. Accepting the guidance of these three is the actual way of following the great personalities Mahajans for real advancement in life. Mahajana yena gata sapanta. A man covered by illusion cannot understand the proper way. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Dharma stapana hetu sadhura vyabhara. The behavior of a devotee is the criterion for all other behavior. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself followed the devotional principles and taught others to follow them. Puri Gosaniraye Acharana, say Dharma Sara. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally followed the behavior of Madhavendra Puri and advised others to follow his principles. Unfortunately, people have been attracted to material body since time immemorial. Ясятма буди конапе тридатуке, свади каладращу бома иджади, ятирта буди салилена кархичич, janeshva bigeshu sa eva gokara. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsman, who considers his land of birth worshipable, and who goes to place of pilgrimage simply to take bath rather than meet a man of transcendental knowledge. There is to be considered like an ass or a cow. Bhagavatam 10:84-13. Those who accept the logic of Gadalika Pravaha and follow in the footsteps of Sudha Mahajans are carried away by the waves of Maya. Bhaktivinoda Thakur therefore warns, Miche Maya Ravasha Yacha Beshe Kacha Habudubu Bai Jiva Krishna Dasa E Vishvasa Kaleta Ara Dukanai. Don't be carried away by the waves of Maya. Just surrender to the lotus feet of Krishna, and all miseries will end. Those who follow social customs and behavior forget to follow the path chalked out by the Mahajans. Thus they are offenders at the feet of the Mahajans. Sometimes they consider such Mahajans very conservative, or they create their own Mahajans. In this way, they ignore the principles of the Parampara system. This is a great misfortune for everyone. If one does not follow in the footsteps of the real Mahajans, one's plans for happiness will be frustrated. This is elaborately explained later in the Madhya Lila, chapter 25, verses 55, 56, and 58. It is there stated, Paramakarana Ishvara Keha Nahi Mane Swasvamata Stape Para Matera Kandane Tate Chaya Darshana Hoite तत्व नाही जाने, महाजान ये काहे से सत्य माने. श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य वाणी अमृतेरा धारा, तिन्हो ये कहाय वास्तु से तत्व सारा. People are so unfortunate that they do not accept the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Instead, they want to be supported by so-called Mahajans or authorities. Tate chaya darshan hoite tatva nahi jani. We cannot ascertain the real truth simply by following speculators. We have to follow the footsteps of the Mahajans in the disciplic succession. Then our attempt will be successful. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Vani Amrit Thera Dhara. Whatever is spoken by Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is an incessant flow of nectar. Whoever accepts his words as reality can understand the essence of the absolute truth. No one can ascertain the absolute truth by following the philosophy of Sankhya or the yoga system of Patanjali, for neither the followers of Sankhya nor the yogis who follow Patanjali accept Lord Vishnu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nate vidu svartagatim hi Vishnum. The ambition of such people is never fulfilled, therefore, they are attracted by the external energy. Although mental speculators may be renowned all over the world as great authorities, actually they are not. Such leaders are themselves conservative and not at all liberal. However, if we preach this philosophy, people will consider Vaishnavas very sectarian. Srila Madhavendra Puri was a real Mahajan, but misguided people cannot distinguish the real from the unreal. But a person who is awakened to Krishna consciousness can understand the real religious path chalked out by the Lord and his pure devotees. Sri Madhavendra Puri was a real Mahajan because he understood the absolute truth properly, and throughout his life he behaved like a pure devotee. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu approved the method of Sri Madhavendra Puri. Therefore, although from the material viewpoint, the Sanodiya Brahmana was on lower platform, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu considered him situated on the highest platform of spiritual realization. Srimad Bhagavatam 6.320 states that there are 12 Mahajans, Brahma, Narada, Shambhu, the four Kumaras, Kapila, Manu, Prahlada, Janaka, Bhishma, Bali, Shukadev, and Yamaraj. To select our Mahajans in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, we have to follow in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his representatives. His next representatives is Sri Swarup Damodar Goswami, and the next representatives are the six Goswamis, Sri Rupa, Sri Sanatan, Bhatta Raghunath, Sri Jiva, Gopala Bhatta, and Dasa Raghunath. A follower of Vishnu Swami's was Sridhar Swami, the most well-known commentator of Srimad Bhagavatam. He was also a Mahajan. Similarly, Chandidas, Vidyapati, and Jayadev were all Mahajans. One who tries to imitate the Mahajans just to become an imitative spiritual master is certainly far away from following in the footsteps of the Mahajans. Sometimes people cannot actually understand how a Mahajan follows other Mahajans. In this way, people commit offenses and fall from devotional service. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वापदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपादकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवंश्च श्रीरूपं सग्रजातं सहगना रघुनाथं वितं तं सजीवं सद्वैतं सवधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्या देवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपदान् सहगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणसिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपीश गोपिकान्ता राधाकान्ता नमोऽस्तुते तप्तकाञ्चन गौरङ्गी राधे वृन्दवनेश्वरि वृषभानुसुते देवी Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinapranam. So the translation again. A devotee's behavior establishes the true purpose of religious principles. The behavior of Madhavendra Puri Goswami is the essence of such religious principles. So I thought to finish the purport so we can take this opportunity to read from Srila Prabhupada's books. Because this, sometimes we neglect that. So we did quite a bit of reading today. So this principle of Mahajan and authority is very significant. And even in a modern day, when people don't like so much, the authority system, and actually it is a challenge in the world. There's so many leadership problems, and people did lost faith in many ways and in many countries in the leadership of the country, and so it is a big challenge. At the same time, still people are looking inspiration and looking for some role models in their life, because there are so many now inspirational speakers. So people are looking some examples, some inspirational words, some motivation in their life, something to imbibe in their lives, in their hearts, that they can follow, that it can enhance their life and make it in some way better. And role model is so important, because various types of behavior and aspirations and the qualities is very difficult to emulate and repeat unless we see a good example in front of us. And that applies for material life and for spiritual life. And we can see how a bad role model have such a big impact. Like parents are always concerned what kind of association children are having. And Shishikodanyatai Maya Purusha Shiki Jai. Sangat Sanjayate Kama, by association, one acquires those qualities. So you can see from the, if children get into some bad company, or teenagers get into some bad company, very quickly, even despite of the fact like parents take a lot of trouble to educate children year after year, don't do this, don't do this, do this. But as soon as teenage years kicks in, and you don't see your parents anymore as authorities, I mean, I don't know if it is happening in India. It's probably happening in India as well, more and more. Is even though that authority of parents is lost, when you don't think anymore, my father is superhero, Mahajan, my mother is superhero, you realize they also have their shortcomings. And usually that kind of realization hits in the teenage years in the West. I don't know how, when it happens in India. Then the authority become, like friends very quickly. It can be in a matter of months and a year when you drop all your kind of things that your parents might have educated you, don't do this, do this, don't smoke, don't drink. But then you realize, that they are smoking themselves and they are drinking themselves all those things that they've been asking you not to do. At teenage years, you realize, I've been actually tricked. The people that were saying, don't do this, don't get into this, and you suddenly realize, not in every case, of course, but often, the people that been educating you not to do it, that behind the back, they are actually doing it. And then you think, okay, I've been missing out, the forbidden apple is much more tasty and nectarian. And then, your friends as well, they're catching up and want to become an adult suddenly and kind of protest against all those good things. And then they get into it. So it's such a important aspect to find this role model, because by the bad role model we pick up so many bad habits, illusionary startings of happiness, and get misdirected and misled and actually get missed out in our aspiration for happiness, because that's the highest aspiration of the soul, in or the human being, and every even animal and ant is ananda mayobhya sat, looking for happiness. So looking for role models who actually truly have that happiness. And of course, in this age of Kali, we can get easily misled. We have these limitations in our capacity to actually perceive who is truly happy. We look into wealthy people. It looks like, that looks like a source of happiness. It's very glittering, it's very flashy, the cars are there, and these kind of people become mahajans, like football players, very well paid nowadays, various actors and stars and etc. Very very flashy life, and it's kind of attractive. So this kind of standards becomes like a mahajan. This is a great soul. You have like a, walls. In my teenage years, people put these big pictures of this such and such a actor and such a star, such and such a football player. Of course, nobody puts a politician actually on the wall nowadays. They kind of completely lost their capacity to be a mahajan or a great soul. And in fact, I saw this president of one of the greatest countries in the world. He was a doll, and not just that, it was a few actually leaders of a certain, countries. They were selling a dolls of those for the dog, to place to the dog. The dog catches with the mouth, and like, when people play and the dog is playing and like enjoying, and you kind of you pulling to yourself, the dog is pulling to you. So this these are the mahajans on the modern day, put a dog to play, and gets ripped in a few days to pieces. These are the stars of a modern day. So people, elect and select, various types of mahajans in their life and follow their example. But the personal behavior offered on these people, intoxication, meat eating, gambling, and very often very arrogant, very like a horrible behavior. And nowadays, even the more horrible is the behavior, the more you're considered like a great person, because you are like an expert in insulting others. Again, speaking about the leaders of the world, there was a leader, actually president of one of the most powerful countries in the world, and there was an election, and he was discussing with another person who is like a second runner in a presidential election, and they were just, instead of speaking about the, how they're gonna care for the country, how they're gonna look after the people, they just smashing each other, they weren't swearing, but it was almost swearing, just kicking each other and fault finding about each other, and that was one of the greatest leaders of the world. And then somebody took those two people and changed their voices to 5 years old kids. And, like some of these kids get into this fight. This is my toy. No, this is my toy. This is my turn. Get out of my playhouse. It's like a two greatest leaders. It just looked like that. It didn't look anything better. It's just to change the voices, reduce the voices from the adult to the 5 years old. They fighting each other. So these are the Mahajans, or great souls of modern day. And then I mean, quite a few people now, kind of getting that intelligence. Okay, this is something is really going wrong here, and completely lost faith in that. And then they're looking for some other Mahajan, and then you look. I mean, there is some wonderful things has been mentioned. Some people may find a really good person as a Mahajan, like I mentioned. If looking after the sick, poor, rich, and etc. Some people are doing really nice work, and why, from the scriptural point of view, people who are doing this wonderful charitable work are not considered Mahajans in a strict sense. I mean, in comparison with the people we just mentioned, this kind of people who do lots of nice work for the people and for the charitable work, etc. Uh, so, comparatively speaking, these are definitely Mahajans. Or if you just look into material world and just forget the spirituality, these are the Mahajans of material world. Great people of material world, because they are actually trying to do something to help people, help humanity, feed and etc. Help people in various ways. So materially speaking, they are Mahajans, and they are actually happiest people, technically speaking, materially, because they are sacrificing something. But there is a problem with that, because of the ego, because of that selfishness is still involved, even in the acts of sacrifice and compassion. And unless the heart is pure, there is still ego involved. So there was one very great personality, one of the Mahajans of material world, was nominated for the Nobel Prize for the charitable activities. However, despite of the nomination, that person, and he was very charitable actually, and maybe still is. But despite of that nomination, it wasn't actually, it didn't got the Nobel Prize. There was somebody else was selected, and the person was so angry. I did so much charitable work. I did so much help for the people. I spent millions of dollars, and I didn't get a Nobel Prize. So you see, there is some material motivation there. And even if in some cases there isn't, there are some people who sacrifice everything so much for the humanity, for the country, and etc. And they set this nice example of amazing sacrifice. But the problem is that this doesn't offer sustainable happiness. From the spiritual transcendental point of view, despite of all that help that physically we can help people, and we should actually do it, but it doesn't address the problem at the root, because still there is another bird, and another bird again. You have to go through the suffering. You still create by your activities create a lot of various types of bad karma, and therefore, despite of all the attempts, like even we have like 18,000 charities in UK, and there's so many charities around the world, and there is millions of pounds and dollars are being spent to help people. Still that suffering is not reducing despite of economical advancement. Still there is a lot of struggle, even in the economically advanced countries. There is so many homeless people, there is so many social problems, and despite of having 18,000 charities in UK that are trying to help people physically, emotionally, mentally, the suffering is not reducing, because that's karmically still remains as a pinprick, despite of all the attempts to help people. So 18,000 people, we have 60 million people in the in this country. So I don't know how mathematically works out, but there is one charity by like 1,000 people or something, I would say. So you have 20,000 charities. So yeah, approximately, I think isn't it? You're good at mathematics. So yeah, there is like a one charity for like 4,000 people or 3,000 or something like that. But still, the suffering seems to be continuing, and some people are really like, wondering, what is going on. We're giving so much, and still there is a problem. So of course, we have to still help people physically, emotionally, but there is something dimension that we're missing out, and if we keep missing out this dimension, that won't solve the problem. There's still the karma will remain, and therefore the suffering will remain, and the alleviation of the physical and emotional suffering won't address the problem or the root, and it will continue birth after birth after birth. So real alleviation of the problem and ultimate suffering is to become free from the cycle of birth and death. That would mean sustainable happiness, because role models are setting the standard of happiness for us. But so we'll have to look beyond the immediate glittering solution. So you have to look for standard of happiness that is actually sustainable. And there is a various promises of happiness, but is conditional, is not an absolute happiness. So if, for example, you become rich, if your aspiration of happiness is to become rich, but so many people won't become rich ever, no matter how much hard they work. So that means this standard of happiness of becoming rich and wealthy is not applies for everyone. Not everybody can attain that. Or if you look of becoming, having a good career. Again, some people have a good career, some people not. So if this is the standard of happiness, there are so many people who fail in their career, or maybe just gonna do their simple work for the rest of their life. And there are so many things. Or if you look at the standard of happiness to become beautiful and look good, sports, cosmetics, etc. If that is your standard of happiness and that is your role models in that field, some people will be beautiful and some people will be not. And even if you are beautiful, your beauty will gonna fade away by the time. The time will take away all the beauty. So are we looking in this role models? Or if your role model is a actor or a football player, all that fame fades away, fades away, and those role models, they go as well, and they exemplify a certain degree of happiness, but it's all gone. They lose their riches, or they eventually leave their world and die, and it's all gone. So we need to find sustainable standard of happiness. We need to find role models who can give happiness that is available for every living being. This is the real standard of happiness. It's not that some are getting it and some will be excluded. We want a standard of happiness that everybody in this world can attain. That is the real standard of happiness, and this spiritual happiness is no matter you're rich or poor, beautiful or ugly, famous or infamous, is accessible to every single being in this world, or human being, of course, because you have to come to the human platform to really access a true happiness. Is accessible. The standard of Krishna consciousness, this happiness is available to every single being. So therefore we have to select a role model in our life, Mahajan, who can provide the spiritual happiness. And this is can provided by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. They are explaining the happiness, the standard of happiness that is sustainable beyond this birth. You cannot, even in this life, you can attain happiness beyond the senses that is accessible despite of any material disqualifications, external circumstances. So this is the Mahajans we want to select and follow in our life: Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and that will take us to the true happiness and true perfection. So we just have 2 minutes for a quick question, if there is anything, or a comment. So therefore, it is a responsibility for us if we really care, because there's so much suffering in this world, and there's so much effort to try to alleviate it. If you really care for this world, and Mahajans, they care unlimitedly because they know the ultimate solution is Krishna consciousness, love of Krishna. So we need to embrace, to really take, be humble. We actually failed in many ways. Even if we've been materially happy, we still failed in our life. So we shouldn't put this, full absolute trust in our own efforts and intelligence to attain happiness. We actually did fail in many ways, and the world has failed despite of their efforts to find the true happiness or sustainable happiness or the happiness that is accessible to everyone. It's actually failed. So therefore, we need to humbly approach those role models and imbibe in our life these teachings, and actually become truly happy ourselves, and then set the example for others, because that's what we read. The purpose of religious principles are establishing a behavior. We have to exhibit saintly behavior, and I'm just preaching to myself. I'm failing every day, but I have an absolute faith that this process makes people into saints. This is true from rags to riches, from being the lowest, personally speaking. It can elevate people to the highest standard of behavior, and that will inspire people. Appreciate People will appreciate that, and we have to really strive for this, following in the footsteps of our role models, Srila Prabhupada, our present-day acharyas, the founder Acharya, six Goswamis. All those wonderful people exemplified the life for us to follow, exemplify, and develop 26 qualities of devotees. And that then saintliness that is already in the soul will manifest in due course of time, and that will inspire, reawaken people's faith in due course of time in the spirituality. That's also, as mentioned on the purport, there are so many so-called Mahajans in the field of spirituality that is actually misleading people. They're not truly giving a true happiness. It's just another form of materialism. So we'll stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Gaura Bhatta Krishna